Ah, the Great Global Financial Reset. Sounds like the title of a Netflix series episode you started watching at 11 o'clock at night and woke up 3 hours later with the TV still on and your soul empty. But no, my friend, this is real. Or at least real enough to make you lose sleep, your job, and maybe that apartment you've been renting for 6 years because you'll never be able to buy it anyway. Welcome to the show. Grab your drink. You'll need it. So, what the heck is the Great Reset? I'm going to explain it to you the way your economics professor never did, because your economics professor probably didn't know, or worse, knew and preferred not to say. The Great Reset is basically the idea that the global financial system, the same one that was already wobbling before 2020 like a bar table with short legs, needs to be completely reinvented, reformatted, given a hard reset. You know when your computer freezes and you hold the power button for 5 seconds? That's it. But imagine that the computer is the world economy and the one holding the button isn't you. It never was you. The term was popularized by the World Economic Forum, that group of incredibly wealthy people who meet every year in Davos, Switzerland, in a place too beautiful to be a meeting about the suffering of others. It's basically a spiritual retreat for billionaires where they drink expensive wine and discuss how to save humanity without giving up their yachts. Very altruistic of them indeed. The book that gave the movement its name was written by Klaus Schwab, the forum's founder, who looks so perfectly like a James Bond villain that sometimes you wonder if he hired an art director to put together that image. German accent, impeccable posture, a name that sounds like a weapon. If he had a white cat in his lap, the internet would explode with conspiracy theories before breakfast. But let's get down to business, because here in the United States, the Great Reset isn't just an abstract concept of the European elite. It's already here. It's already here. It's already picked up its ticket at the airport, checked into the hotel, and ordered the most expensive room service on the menu, all on your tab, of course. Let's start with money. The American dollar, that magnificent and slightly worn-out creature that was once backed by gold until, in 1971, Nixon decided that gold was too old-fashioned, too limiting. And so, in a historic move that economists still debate and ordinary, Americans were never informed about the world entered the era of fiat money. Fiat comes from faith, literally. Your money is worth something because you believe it is. It's the greatest collective self-convincing operation in human history, surpassing even that time someone convinced the entire country that low-fat was healthy, and everyone spent 20 years eating sugary, fat-free yogurt with a smile on their face. And then came 2008, the financial crisis, the mortgage collapse, the banks' bet on financial products so complex that even they didn't fully understand them, lost trillions, and then the American government stepped in with the biggest bailout in history. They called it a bailout, which in honest American English means the guys bet wrong, you pay the bill, and they get the year-end bonus. No executives went to jail. Some even won awards. It's American capitalism in its purest and most uninhibited state. The Federal Reserve, which Americans affectionately call the Fed, and which is neither federal nor does it have reserves in the sense you might imagine, began printing money at a rate that would make your home printer give out. Quantitative easing was the fancy name. It means we create money out of thin air to inject into the system. We create it, out of thin air, like a magician. But instead of a rabbit coming out of a hat, trillions of dollars come out. And the bill comes to you in the form of inflation a few years later when you go to the supermarket and realize that a box of cereal costs the equivalent of a full dinner in 1998. And then came 2020. The pandemic? The world stopped. And the Fed did it again, only this time with even less ceremony. More than $4 trillion created in less than 2 years. The Fed's balance sheet almost doubled in size. To put it in perspective, if you counted $1 per second, non-stop, without eating, without sleeping, it would take you more than 31,000 years to reach 1 trillion. They made 4. while you were at home making sourdough bread and watching Tiger King. And it was precisely at that moment that the World Economic Forum decided it was the perfect time to launch the concept of the Great Reset. You have to give credit to the timing, right? The world in flames, the economy wrecked, people panicking, and they say, great time to talk about systemic reform. It's like showing up with a gym brochure when someone's in the hospital. Technically correct, completely insensitive. Perfect. The motto of the Great Reset is Build Back Better, which incidentally was literally adopted as a slogan by the Biden administration, fueling more conspiracy theories than any episode of the History Channel. But let's separate fact from fantasy because both are frightening in their own way. Fact: the global financial system is in a situation that economists describe as unsustainable. American debt has already surpassed $33 trillion. $33 trillion. The country's entire GDP is roughly $26 trillion. This means that the United States owes more than it produces in an entire year. It's like discovering that your neighbor is using 6 credit cards to pay the bill for the 7th. Every month. For decades. And nobody's calling the bank to collect because the neighbor is the biggest customer and everyone's afraid of losing business. Fact: the dollar has dominated global trade for decades, but this dominance is being challenged. China and Russia are actively seeking alternatives. The BRICS group, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has been discussing creating an alternative currency for international trade. If this works, the U.S.'s ability to simply print money and export inflation to the rest of the world begins to weaken. And then the problem ceases to be abstract and directly impacts your wallet, your 401k, your dream of retiring with some dignity. Fact: central bank digital currencies, called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, are being developed in nearly 100 countries. The U.S. Federal Reserve is studying the digital dollar. It sounds modern, technological, efficient, and it is. But it also means that every penny you spend can be tracked, monitored, and in more authoritarian versions of this system, blocked. China already has the digital yuan in operation, and every now and then news emerges about how the government manages to monitor individual spending in real time. If you think this would never happen in the U.S., remember that you also thought you would never be stuck at home for an entire year because of a pandemic. Life has been surprising. And this is where the Great Reset starts to look less like an economic recovery plan and more like something that makes you uncomfortable without being able to properly explain why. Because there are 2 ways to read it. The official way, which the World Economic Forum, the IMF, and central banks will present to you, is the old system was unfair, unsustainable, and full of flaws. We need a new one. Greener, more inclusive, more digital, more efficient. It makes sense. Nobody will dispute that the current system is a marvel of social justice. Another way to read it is, a small, very specific group of people who already have more power than any individual should have will use this crisis as an opportunity to consolidate even more control, this time over the very money you use every day. And the result will be wrapped in progressive language and presented as progress, when in practice it's the biggest transfer of power in modern history. It's not necessarily a conspiracy either. It's politics. It's how things work. Every crisis in history has been exploited by someone to gain power. Every single one. Without exception. This isn't cynicism, it's history. And the average American, the guy who works 40 hours a week, has 2 jobs because one doesn't pay the bills, is behind on college tuition, can't afford a house because prices went up 80% during the pandemic while the developer was buying up all the lots. Is this guy going to be consulted about the Great Reset at some point? Spoiler alert, no. He'll receive the results and sign off on them because the alternatives will be worse, or at least will seem worse, which is almost the same thing when you're tired and hungry. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies entered this story as an attempt to create a parallel system. The idea is elegant. Money that cannot be printed infinitely, that does not belong to any government, that works in a decentralized way. The perfect libertarian dream. And it worked partially. But it also turned into a giant casino where ordinary individuals buy at the top and sell at the bottom while hedge funds and technology companies take the lion's share of the appreciation. The alternative system ended up reproducing the vices of the system it was trying to replace. Surprise! Gold is back in the spotlight. Central banks around the world have bought more gold in the last 2 years than at any time since the end of the gold standard. China, Russia, India, Poland, Turkey, all buying, quietly, consistently, while financial analysts on Twitter debate whether Dogecoin will reach $1 again. What central banks know that retail investors don't is always a fascinating question to ask. In the United States, the conversation about the Great Reset has also turned into a political battle. The right sees it as globalism, disguised socialism, the end of private property, the famous "you won't own anything and you'll be happy" that went viral as both a meme and a nightmare. The left tends to view it more sympathetically, especially the sustainability and inequality aspects. And while the two sides clash in YouTube comments, decisions are made in Basel, in Geneva, in closed meetings of central bankers you never voted for and never will be able to vote for because they are not elected. The Fed is not elected. The IMF is not elected. The World Bank is not elected. But they influence your life more than any senator you put there with your vote once every 6 years. So what do you do with all this? Because it's easy to stand here, being ironic and sarcastic, deconstructing the system while offering no practical alternatives. So let's be straightforward for a second. Without the armor of humor, you need to diversify. Don't put everything into a single currency, a single bank, a single type of asset. Not because collapse is imminent and certain, but because concentration is fragility, and you've already learned that from the pandemic, from 2008, from any crisis that caught you unprepared. You need to understand the basics of what's happening with money, because financial ignorance isn't neutral. It has a monthly cost that shows up in your bank account. You need to stop completely outsourcing your financial decisions to authority figures without questioning them, whether it's a TikTok, influencer, or a bank manager with an expensive tie. Both have an interest in selling you something. And perhaps, just perhaps, you need to accept that the system will change. That the question isn't whether there will be a reform, but who will shape that reform, on whose terms, protecting whose interests, and whether the average individual will have any say in this conversation or will only discover the new normal once it has already been implemented. The Great Reset isn't a secret plot activated by a hidden key in the basement of Davos. But it's also not simply a benevolent movement of enlightened leaders who suddenly cared about you after decades of ignoring your existence. It's politics, it's economics, it's power. And power, as any American knows from elementary school, tends to concentrate in the hands of those who already have the most, unless there's organized resistance, information circulating, and citizens who refuse to be passive spectators of their own financial history. Or you can simply ignore it, go back to Netflix, and wait for someone to sort it out. That's also a choice. Historically, it hasn't been the best, but it's definitely the most comfortable in the short term. And that's what they're really counting on, that you choose comfort now, because it's much easier to shape a world where people are busy, tired, and distracted than one where they are attentive, organized, and have time to ask inconvenient questions. So do this. Share this video, not because it will save the global financial system, but because at least one more person will start asking the right questions. And the right questions are the only thing that concentrated power genuinely fears. Until the next episode. If you still have money to pay your internet bill,